So the Ball Lightning Sorcerer has undoubtedly been one of the most impressive and fun builds of Diablo 4 Season 2 so far. And while this build is not exactly a secret anymore, with many players already trying it, I thought I would give my take on an ultra tanky, almost immortal, perma-stunning version of it. So first of all, Season 2 did see some general buffs with Ball Lightning. First of all, with Wizard's Ball Lightning increasing the number of crackling energy that you can generate, and which if you skill into the appropriate passives on your skill tree, this will actually result in a significantly more amount of mana that you generate from picking up these crackling energies that, well, you'll have more crackling energies to pick up, right, rather. Next, there's also been a couple of updates to Paragon, most notably with Static Surge, the legendary node, which previously would just give you 10 mana whenever you stun an enemy that was nearby or close enemies. But the new effect is after spending 100 mana, your next cast of Chain Lightning or Charge Bolt. And in this case, if you're running the Chain Lightning enchantment, you'll also be casting Chain Lightnings as you spend your mana on Ball Lightnings. You'll actually be able to not only make enemies vulnerable, but also gain additional mana back, right? And also have this mana cost requirement, this 100 mana, be reduced by your mana cost reduction bonuses, which you would want to take on your gear. Next, there are also some new uniques in Season 2 that this build can definitely benefit greatly from, and mostly Tybalt's Will, which not only gives you bonus multiplicative damage whenever you become unstoppable, and there are multiple ways to become unstoppable with this build, especially with a specific aspect that we'll be taking. But not only do you gain damage from becoming unstoppable, but you also gain 50 of your primary resource, being your mana, right? So this is yet another way to generate your mana, on top of all the other ways to do so with this especially mana-hungry build. And in terms of the new Vampiric Powers, there are a few that benefit this build greatly as well, especially the Ravenous aspect, which increases your attack speed based on a percentage of your movement speed, and which this build scales beautifully with too. Next, the resistance changes and the game and monsters being balanced around these new resistance changes also benefit sorcerers, well, mainly intelligence classes, because intelligence innately gives you resistance, so you don't have to necessarily find as many sources of resistances on your gear, which allows you to prioritize other stats on your gear. So with that, starting with the skills, you have a couple of points in Firebolt. This isn't really needed to equip anywhere on your skill bar or even enchantment slots, but I suppose it's sort of a flex pick for an enchantment slot if you want to benefit a bit more from burning enemy effects, such as reduced damage taken from burning enemies, and also the Paragon glyph Flame Feeder, although Flame Feeder also can be procced through Flame Shield because Flame Shield actually does damage, so you don't necessarily need Firebolt for that. But anyhow, moving on to the next part of the skill tree, if I just move up real quick, we have 1 point in Chain Lightning. We won't be manually casting Chain Lightning, but with the enchantment slot that you'll get from, or the enchantment Chain Lightning that you'll be able to get from even just investing 1 point into it, every time you spend 100 mana, you can form a Chain Lightning, which will allow you to benefit from a couple of things. One of them being the recharging aspect, which by the way is also a dungeon aspect, so that's very helpful. The recharging aspect gives you additional mana, or regenerates your mana whenever your Chain Lightning bounces, so this will help with your mana regeneration too, especially since again Ball Lightning is a fairly mana hungry build. And then if we also go over to the Paragon board here, we are also using the Static Surge legendary node, which again allows your Chain Lightning cast to make enemies vulnerable and further restore 10% of your mana. And this mana spending is actually reduced by mana cost reduction, right? Which is why you want to try to take that on your gear when you can, mainly in your offhand and your amulet. And with that, moving on back to the skill tree, if we just zoom back out a bit, besides Chain Lightning 1 point on this cluster, you can also take Potent Warding. This is also changed in this patch to also give you maximum resistance. And by the way, maximum resistance is actually really strong. That's just the way the math works out. So you want to take this for additional tankiness. Next, 1 point into Devastation just to chain into this next part, which is to increase your damage from your core and mastery skills, with Ball Lightning being a mastery skill whenever you're above 50 mana. So that's kind of a no-brainer. Next, we have 1 point in Flame Shield, pretty standard stuff, going into Shimmering Flame Shield. Next, we also have Teleport, You can actually max teleport here if you want to, you know, do it more frequently and make you more unstoppable, which will proc your Tybalt's Will, right? Will make you unstoppable more frequently, which will give you this benefit from this new unique, and also regenerate your mana, right, from it, and just allow you to move faster in general. So again, the points here are pretty standard, Shimmering Teleport, and then down here I have also 1 point into Frost Nova, and then going into Mystical Frost Nova to make enemies vulnerable, and then 1 point to Ice Armor with Enhanced Ice Armor. Ice Armor is nice because I'm actually pairing it with Snow Veiled aspect. This actually allows your Ice Armor to make you unstoppable and give you additional armor. So this is yet another way to proc your Tybalt's Will, right, if you want, whenever you want to use it. Next, we have Glass Cannon for increased damage. Pretty good one that a lot of builds will take. And then here I have 2 points into Elemental Attunement for lucky hits and critical strikes to have a chance to reset your defensive skills. Pretty strong as well. Next we have down here, we actually put 1 point into Lightning Spear, and you'll see that I've equipped Lightning Spear. So typically a lot of these standard Ball Lightning builds will use Unstable Currents. It is a flashy skill and it's a powerful one, and you can use it to kill elites and stuff. But I actually prefer the safety, at least in some cases, of Lightning Spear. You can actually flex this skill with Unstable Currents if you want. So the thing with Lightning Spear though is if you take Invoked Lightning Spear, it actually can stun enemies. It's not even a lucky hit, it just straight up stuns enemies whenever it critically strikes. And if you actually take an aspect called the Aspect of Shared Misery, this will actually allow your Lightning Spear stuns to spread to other enemies. So that's actually quite a great survival or survivability boost if you decide to use that. And I imagine would be good for things like tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon farming and just consistently like not dying by just having this option instead of using Unstable Currents. Because in my opinion, Unstable Currents is kind of like a win more button. With your DPS already being fairly insane with Ball Lightning, I would rather have a little bit more survivability and stunning with this. And it will also rack up things like the staggered bars on bosses and whatnot, right? But again, this is easily flexed with Unstable Currents. Next, anyway, on this cluster, we have a couple of points in the Precision Magic for higher lucky hit for the various lucky hit effects that we'll have, such as Static Discharge, which I'll get to later, and also the aforementioned Elemental Attunement. Here I also have 1 point here, Align the Elements, just to connect to Mana Shield, which is whenever you spend mana, a lot of mana, and again, this build does chew through your mana really quickly, you get a hefty 21% damage reduction. Also, using any cooldown grants you 30% of your maximum life as a barrier, so this is really powerful too. You have constant barriers up whenever you're using any of these standard cooldowns up here, the defensives. Moving down, of course, we want to max out our main damage skill, being Ball Lightning. And you can check out, or you can take rather, Wizard's Ball Lightning, which was again recently buffed with this patch by giving you 2 crackling energies instead of 1. And the synergy from generating crackling energies is if you take the 1 point here to connect down to Invigorating Conduit and max this out, you actually gain mana whenever you pick up 1 crackling energy. So this buff to Wizard's Ball Lightning was actually huge to give you even more crackling energies to help you maintain your mana with this extremely mana hungry build. Which then when you have increased attack speed, you're more likely to even maintain even more Ball Lightnings, right? And then down here, again, I don't have Unstable Currents right now, but you can consider taking these points here instead of Lightning Spear. But here, this is pretty important. You want to take 1 point here, Coursing Currents, to connect to Electrocution, which will just give you a bit more survivability whenever you crit enemies. Down here, since I'm not in this iteration taking Unstable Currents, the ultimate, I'm instead taking, so I'm not taking Overflowing Energy, but I'm instead taking Virus Mastery for just some straight up increased damage and defense. And for the other enchantment slot really quick, we do have Ball Lightning, which allows your lucky hits on critical strikes to spawn additional static Ball Lightnings. So this is just another way to get even more Ball Lightnings on the field, right? Really, really strong. For gear really quick, the most important one is Gravitational Aspect, which allows your ball lightnings to orbit around you to be able to hit a close-up enemy multiple times, right? And especially when you rack up multiple ball lightnings, it'll really rack up that damage. So this is the first aspect offensively that you need. Next, you also want the recharging aspect for your chain lightnings. This is a dungeon aspect. Also, Storm Swell is quite good. This is also from a dungeon, the Onyx Hold, which increases your damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier up, and you'll constantly be having barriers up. Another one is Conceited Aspect. This one you will have to farm up and get as a drop, but you should be able to find one pretty easily. This is just straight up increased damage while you have a barrier active, which again you will have lots of. Accelerating is good too because again, Ball Lightning scales well with it, so this will increase your attack speed whenever you crit. And one more is Control Aspect. This is quite strong, just for straight up increased damage to stunned and or frozen enemies, right? And especially with the, again, the Lightning Spear, you'll be stunning enemies quite frequently, especially with the Sheared Misery aspect here on your boots. So this will actually have additional benefits. Of course, whenever you Frost Nova enemies too, you'll be dealing increased damage to them too. On to some of the other aspects. Again, the Snow Veiled aspect gives you Unstoppable to proc Tybalt's Will, but you don't necessarily have to use Tybalt's Will. Let's say you haven't found it, you can definitely use something like the Virus Mastery one, which gives you damage reduction whenever you have, well, with Virus Mastery, it give you additional damage reduction called Mage Lord's aspect, so this is quite good as well. But this is more good for like nightmare dungeons instead of bosses where there are more enemies, right? Because this gets more benefit whenever there's more enemies beside you. So this is also an option if you want to be even more tanky, but I think it's kind of overkill, and Tybalt's Will with the resource generation is just too good. So I'd rather have this. And then here, so first of all, again, I have Snow Veiled aspect, then I have Disobedience to shore up your armor. Resists are pretty much set with the sorcerer because you have like decent intelligence to give you resists, and then because of that, on your gems you can also take skulls. Although if you have like a specific resistance you want to shore up or just need some overall resist, you can also use diamonds or whatever color gems you want, right, for that specific resist. And as for affixes, really quick, you want cooldown reduction on amulet and offhand. You want mana cost reduction wherever you can, which is again your amulet and your offhand. There's some flex picks for your amulet, but +3 ranks to mastery skills is extremely important, really good because it directly gives your Ball Lightning additional ranks. And then total armor is strong here too, again because your resistances are pretty set and you can just shore up your armor. For rings, you can take crit, damage to close, max life, and resource generation for both. Damage to close and crit are just straight up good affixes, so you can also take damage to close on your weapon. And then in addition to that, you can have mastery skill damage and then int and all stats on your weapon. For your offhand, besides the aforementioned affixes being cooldown reduction and mana cost reduction, you can also take resource generation and critical strike chance. The other aspect that you consider, or the other affix that you can consider, is the lucky hit chance to give you primary resource. That's also a pretty good one to have on your offhand, and one that you also want to take on your gloves, which besides that, you can have attack speed, crit chance, and then the last one you can take something like intelligence or all stats. So instead of intelligence, you can also go with something like lucky hit chance if you want, chance slow maybe, increase critical strike damage if you want, might not be bad either. But here I just have intelligence. And then for defensive aspects, you can have cooldown reduction on your helm, max life wherever you can, so it's also on your rings, and then your helm. Total armor is great. Maximum mana is actually a good one to take on your helm, or you can take a resist if you actually need resist, but maximum mana is actually decent here. For your chest, you can take again armor, damage reduction of various sorts, and max life. Pants, we already have Tybalt's Will, but if you're using a legendary instead, you can still take similar or about the same stats as your chest, right? But one notable thing about pants is that you can actually get ranks of Ball Lightning, so you definitely want to have that if you're not using Tybalt's Will on your pants. For boots, you basically just want movement speed. The rest can be kind of filler. Mana cost reduction is of course useful, but for the other ones, you can take resist, or you can take, if you have enough resist, ranks to Frost Nova and Teleport. And then of course for the aspect we have Shared Misery. For Vampiric Powers, Vaminous is great for attack speed based on movement speed, and then Accursed Touch, which curses enemies and makes them vulnerable, is often comboed with Prey on the Weak. Well, this is the one that makes them vulnerable whenever they're cursed, and also gives you a damage multiplier on vulnerable enemies. So these two are frequently comboed in a lot of builds, really strong. And on top of that, you can also go with Metamorphosis for yet another unstoppable source to allow you to proc Tybalt's Will even more consistently, and then also apply more Vampiric Curse to benefit from Prey on the Weak on even more enemies. And lastly, you can run Domination for just straight up increased damage to stun and frozen enemies, which you will be stunning and freezing enemies a lot with your Lightning Spear and your Frost Nova. Aside from this though, or aside from I guess Metamorphosis, if you have already a lot of cooldown reduction and are able to use your defensive enough to be unstoppable a lot, especially if you have Snow Veiled Aspect, you can also swap Metamorphosis for something like Resilience for even more damage reduction. Or if you want to swap over to like Unstable Currents, if you prefer that, you can also go with the ultimate skill cooldown reduction power, which is called Anticipation. Lastly, for the Paragon board, I won't go into too much specific depth on this, but you can just check out my build template in the description box. But for the glyphs and legendary nodes, first of all, we have Reinforced for some damage reduction when you have a barrier. And then here we're taking Elementalist to just increase damage to enemies whenever you deal different types of elements to them. And then besides that, we have the Charged Aspect for even more Crackling Energy synergy, which gives you increased damage whenever you pick up Crackling Energy, which you'll be doing a lot. And then a lot of the rare nodes, of course, you'll be picking up for just straight up like damage increases and also resistances. Moving on, we have Territorial, which gives you even more damage reduction against close enemies, really strong. And some lightning damage too here with the rare node. Next, we have Destruction with the Burning Instinct board, but anyhow, you'll be doing Destruction to increase even more damage whenever you critical strike enemies, which is pretty frequent. Next, we also have Adept, which very importantly will increase your mastery skill damage, again with Ball Lightning being a mastery skill, and also gives it increased area. So this is actually really strong. And then we also have the Frigid Fate here to increase damage to vulnerable enemies. And of course with the Vampiric Curses, you'll be making enemies vulnerable a lot, and also with your Frost Nova. And lastly, the Static Surge, as I mentioned before, is really helpful. It helps you restore mana and also gives another source of vulnerable. So you don't necessarily need to take Frost Nova, but I figured with the frozen enemies benefit here from control, and also with the Vampiric power here, Domination, you can still benefit from Frost Nova, and also of course just for the survivability and just freezing enemies and helping you, not take damage, right? So anyhow, with the last glyph, we have Flame Feeder, which will increase your damage to burning enemies, which with your Flame Shield, you can burn enemies with it. And that is pretty much it for my ultra tanky perma-stunning Ball Lightning build variant. Let me know what you think in the description box below, what you're playing in Season 2, and with that, I will catch you in the next video. Happy hunting. Peace.